One of the most underrated pieces of advice in chess. What's underrated? That's not a word. Cut that out. One of the most underrated pieces of advice in chess is to do absolutely nothing in your games, guys. Obviously, you need to control the center, protect the king. But other than that, you can make a whole bunch of quiet moves in faster time controls like blitz and rapid, where the clock is a weapon. And you can see here, this philosophy of not forcing has been helping me. I've won some 10 of my last 11 blitz games. No doubt been reported for cheating. And you can see if I go back to my blitz page here, I've risen into the 1400s, only been playing the game a few years on chess.com blitz charts. And most importantly, over the last 30 days, I've gained some 150 points, winning 42 of my last 75 games. And so in this video, I'm going to show you some of my recent positions. Elite players have spoken about this on their Twitch streams, YouTube videos, where you just don't need to force, where you can just improve your position quietly and wait for your opponent to make a mistake, which is no doubt going to happen at the lower levels. So let's get to it. Okay, so here we go, game one. And so I have 1b3 from Live Squares, future great player. And so Nimzo last on attack, one of the greatest openings of all time. I get a lot of snotty messages in the chat from people like, good luck with that in the future. Right, dude, unless you're better than Grandmaster Adiban Bhaskaran, whose lifetime repertoire course 1b3 I bought from Chessable, unless you're better than him, you can off, guys. And so we have e6, bishop e2. Okay, we try to control the center from the flank here with the bishop. We have knight f6, c4. Key idea in Bhaskaran's lines is to play this move early on in many lines, not all, where we try to make sure we're contesting for the d5 square. We have here c6, e3, bishop e7, knight f3, castles, bishop e2, d5, castles, h6, queen c2. Okay, so not forcing my pieces up the board. I haven't even gone past the 4th rank. Importantly, I'm not making weak moves. Okay, objectively, this might not be the best opening according to Stockfish, but I am contesting for the center. I am developing my pieces, and in this position, it was my opponent who made this first kind of dubious move where they play queen to c7. So if you look at the position before queen to c7, this pawn on d5 is protected 1, 2, 3 times, but after queen to c7 is protected only twice. Obviously, if there's an exchange here on d5, they cannot play c takes d5. I'm just teeing this up, guys. You know what's going to happen. And so we have d3, knight to d7, knight to d2, completing development, knights and bishops out, rooks are connected. Okay, so we're good to go. And in this position, we have e5. Not a great move. Again, this pawn on d5 is now only protected once by this knight. And you know what's going to happen, guys? C takes d5. And then you're like, they didn't do it right. They did. C takes d5. And now we have queen takes c7 and they hit the resign button. Okay, easy peasy. And so, was there a gambit? Was there some forcing line? Was there some crazy thing that I did? No, guys. We're just developing our pieces, waiting for some kind of positional error. Obviously, in this position, they play queen to c7. And you're like, well, that's quite basic, but this is going to happen at the sub 1500 level. Remember, in Blitz, you only have a few seconds to think. And when you kind of make these kind of positional mistakes, it's easy to blunder. Okay, so here's another Nimzo Larsen game. We have b3, d5, another way to go. Principal thing to do, put the other pawn in the center. You don't have to play e5. Bishop b2, and now there's this move d4, which I think is dubious. There are some 830 variations on Adiban Bhaskaran's lifetime repertoire 1b3 course, and I don't think this is ever mentioned. One of the problems with pushing pawns early on is that A, you're relinquishing the center, but B, it invites tempo gaining moves. So after, say, something like knight to f3, this pawn is hanging, black is forced to defend. We have knight to c6, e3, which carries the threat of bishop b5, and further problems here on d4. They're kind of forced to take. We have d takes e3, f takes e3, and okay, the game is equal. However, there's a kind of positional gain here. I have 2 central pawns. They have only 1. They play this move bishop to g4, not very strong. I'm not worried about this pin. I can always play bishop e2. There's also a semi-open file here. I can castle, so I'm not worried about moving my queen. And so in this position, I have bishop to b5. They play queen d5. And it was in this position that I realized I can just go ahead and give up the bishop player and play this move, bishop takes c6. Because if they play b takes c6, okay, they have these isolated pawns, not losing, but that is a structural weakness in an endgame. They decide to take with their queen. However, now what I'm thinking about is this move knight to e5. Not immediately because this pawn is hanging. I castle, but in this position I realize they cannot castle. And so this is the benefit of doing tactics puzzles over and over again. You just start to see these things. I can't really explain it. I just saw it. They cannot long castle here, so they did. And in this position, I have this strong move, knight to e5. Now the bishop is hanging, the queen is hanging. They decide to take the queen. I take the queen. We have a queen exchange. But now the rook is hanging and the bishop is hanging. Okay, if they decide to take the knight, they have this horrible pawns here on the c file. They play this move, rook to d6. And in this position, I play this very weak move, knight takes e7 check, which does allow you to go up a pawn. However, I could have gone with knight to a7 check, king b8, knight to b5, the rook moves, and now I could have played knight takes c7, king takes c7, and after taking the bishop here on d1, I'm up 2 clean pawns, okay? But didn't quite see all that, understandable, it's a blitz game, knight takes e7, check, and we do go up a clean pawn, and I do go on to convert this game. Here they're hanging a pawn again, I believe. And so, again, I'm not the one forcing in this game. Objectively, is this the best opening? Probably not. It doesn't matter here. You can see here with this queen d5 move, my opponent is trying to play kind of menacing attacking moves, trying to get their queen involved, try to look at this g2 pawn, get the bishop involved. But it doesn't really work. After bishop takes c6, I can see this threat here of knight to e5. Okay, so here is game 3, a nice little example of where we can use the clock against our opponent. And so I don't play with increments. I want my opponent to manage their time well. And so in this game, they get into all kinds of defensive issues, burn a lot of time thinking, and effectively lose on time. And I'm not really doing anything in this game other than just making improving moves. And so we have b3, Nimzo and d5, bishop b2, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, e3, a6, bishop e2, bishop g4, h3, bishop f5, a3, very important here. This opponent could be looking to play this move, knight to b4, which would then create a problem here on c2. So again, just slightly improving the position. We have queen to d7, knight to d4, the bishop attacking the bishop. We have bishop g6, castles, and now there's this move e5. And so you're going to see this a lot at the lower levels. I do this myself. My opponent hasn't castled, and sometimes when you listen to top players in their Twitch streams, their YouTube videos, they talk about not doing a pawn break until your king is safe. Obviously, there are occasions where you have to strike in the center with a pawn. However, in this case, e5 isn't strong, because after there are a whole bunch of exchanges here, this king could be exposed, and this is exactly what happens in this game. We have knight takes c6, queen takes c6, c4. I'm trying to bust open the center here, realizing that this king is in the center. We have bishop d6, knight to c3, and then comes this weak move here, d4, takes. It looks like he has a tempo, or she has a tempo on this knight on c3, but remember, if you can attack the queen and steal a move, you should do it. So I play this move, bishop to f3. The queen's got to move. But after the queen moves, what are we going to do? See a check, deliver a check, obviously. And so we have rook e1 check. And it's in this position that, okay, again, if you turn on the engine, white is slightly winning. What does this matter in the game? However, remember, in 5-minute blitz, it's just awkward to defend. And what's important in the game is not necessarily the moves, but the clock. Just observe what happens on the clock here. So my opponent has 4 minutes on the clock. I have 3 minutes 14, so I've actually fallen a lot behind in this game. And we have king to d8. Okay, bishop e7 I think was the best move, but you can see their clock has now dropped to 350. We have knight to d5, knight takes d5. Their clock now drops further to 318. A few more moves. Bishop e4, f5. You can see the clock drops to 240 for black. We have bishop to f3, bishop f7, bishop takes e4. Okay, bishop to e6. Their clock is down to 218. Go for an exchange here, try to open up the game. We've got queens and rooks, king in the center. Rook takes e5. We have king to c7, and you can see the clock is now down to 1 minute 43 seconds. Okay, in this position, after queen to c2, the bishop on e6 is hanging. My opponent is forced to defend. Again, now after rook to e1, the bishop is again hanging. They play the right move like here. Bishop to f7. We have takes. A few more moves. And you can see in this position that after rook takes e8, bishop takes f8, let's say queen c2, My opponent has 1 minute 12 seconds on the clock while I have 1 minute 37 seconds. And so it's about kind of game management here. There's no increment, just play solid, get them to try and destruct here on time. And so we play a few more moves and get the opportunity to have this queen exchange. Okay, I go for it. We actually get into this position here where theoretically I believe it's a drawn endgame. However, it just doesn't matter. My opponent is down to just 3 seconds. There's no increment, 26 seconds, and they're just going to lose, which is exactly what happens. Okay, so let's have a look at game 4 here. Another nice little example of just keeping it together. I play a whole bunch of moves in this game, which I don't think are necessarily solid, but just good enough to keep the game going, waiting for that kind of mistake. And so we have here b3, e6, bishop b2, d5, e3, knight f6, c4, contesting for the center, it's important. a6, knight f3, c5, bishop e2, knight c6, d4, bishop e7, castles, castles, knight on b to d2, d takes c4, b takes c4 in this position, and here after c takes d4, knight takes d4 looks bad, because now it looks like this pawn on c4 is just an isolated pawn. It's a structural weakness. You want to avoid stuff like this, but okay, not the end of the world. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop to d7. I know where this bishop is going. It's heading to this square here on c6, and I'm never going to allow these type of complications where the bishop is staring at the white king like this. So I immediately play this move, bishop to f3, removing this bishop. Now we have b takes c6, and they also have this isolated pawn on c6. We continue, queen to f3, tempo gaining move here. The c6 pawn is hanging, rook to c8, knight to e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4. And in this position, bishop to f6, trying to liquidate. Instead of taking, see if you can find a way to develop a piece, just improve your position slightly. This is something that I would do recently now. In the olden days, I might have just taken, but now I realize this rook on f1 is sleeping, so I play rook on f1, sorry, rook on f to d1. We have bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and now we're looking to double up on the d file. We've got this pattern here now, so we want to avoid stuff like this. Obviously, if this rook has to move, then this rook will be hanging, so you want to avoid stuff like this. We have rook to d1, a pawn push, allowing my rook to get to the 7th rank, and now my opponent does have to think a little bit about defending. Okay, so obviously if you can get a rook to the 7th rank, you should put it there. We have a4, rook to d4, very poor move, easily battered away by this move c5, which they play. Rook back to d1, going for a rook exchange. And in this position, after h6, I played this very sneaky move, queen to d3. And so I know you realize immediately, guys, you do your tactics pose the whole time, that the rook here on the back rank cannot leave, because after rook d8 check, the king has no escape squares. The queen would have to be given up. And remember, sub 1500 level blitz, there are much simpler blunders than this. People just hanging pieces. They go ahead and push their rook up the board, not realizing this. Rook on d8 check, and they hit that resign button. Okay, so here's a nice example of an opponent who just made a whole bunch of quiet moves themselves, maybe trying to do the same thing, trying to win on time, just waiting for a mistake. And so it's important not to burn your whole time in a blitz game trying to figure out how to deal with their bad opening. And they play a really bad opening here, but you know, it still can be held together according to the engine. After b3, we have here e6, d6. Okay, so obviously no grandmaster is going to do stuff like this. And we have here e3, just keep moving, don't burn time here. e5, c4, knight to e7, knight f3, h6, bishop e2. Again, another pawn move here, g6. So it's objectively, this is not good here from black, but don't burn time. Okay, d4, bishop to g7, castles, knight to d7, queen c2. I'm worried about here stuff going on this diagonal. Want to make sure that my bishop is defended. Obviously, the rook is vulnerable here. We have e takes d4, knight takes d4, castles, knight to d2, trying to complete development. Knight moves out to e5. That's kind of annoying. This knight might be strong one day. We've got to remove it. Don't really want to play f4 and make a backward pawn here. Just go to remove it with this move, knight to f3. Knight takes f3, bishop takes f3. Bishop is nicely placed. We have this move c5. Knight to b5. Happy to go for the bishop exchange here. I take the bishop, the dark squared defender here from the king. And so there are some of these possibilities of checks here along this diagonal now. We have knight to c3, bishop f5, that's battered away with e4, bishop retreats, knight to d5, takes, and we've got this solid pawn chain here, okay? So again, not forcing, bishop to e4, go for the exchange, queen to f6, and it was in this position, rook on a to e1, that I think that my opponent starts to lose it here. So obviously rook on a to e1 rules out a rook move here to e8, because obviously we'll give up the queen for 2 rooks. That's a good trade for us. And so in this position, they play this move b5 that leaves these backward pawns here on d6 and a6. So I go for this move queen to e7, and here I think they shouldn't be taken, but they take. And this allows here a rook on the 7th rank. And the problem here is that now I'm going to start targeting these backward pawns. They're realizing this, so we have b takes c4, b takes c4, trying to liquidate the position, obviously get my other rook involved in the game. I'm not going to take here, I just want to keep a rook here on the 7th rank. We have takes, and you can see now they have 1 rook, but they have these 2 weak backward pawns, and so one of them is blundered, and I get myself into a completely winning position. So my opponent isn't necessarily playing badly, they're not hanging pieces, they're trying to make quiet moves, but it comes down to these kind of small things here. Don't force, don't try to do crazy things where, you know, you're pushing your pawns in front of your king up the board, you're going on some big attack. I'm not forcing myself. I play this move queen to e7, they take, and that's when I think the position starts to unravel for them. From an engine perspective, I think an engine can hold this whole thing together, but it's quite difficult for a human player. There you go, guys. Do absolutely nothing in your games is one of the ways up the chess mountain, I think. Obviously, there's a whole other approach of playing attack in chess, playing gambits, sacking pieces. Okay, I can see how that works. But we have this thing available to us where we can make quiet moves, improve our position, contest for the center, protect the king, obviously, and just wait for our opponent to make a mistake. If I could think of a football, soccer analogy for you Americans out there, imagine a team sitting back, handling the press well from their opponent, but they come to life with an explosive counterattack when their opponent makes a mistake. Thank you very much for your time.